Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of fantasy series that I do not plan to continue on with. And as is the case for a lot of fantasy readers, even though there is that desire to complete the series you're in the middle of, because part of what makes fantasy so amazing and something that so many of us connect to is just how intricate the world building can be and how these stories can be so vast and epic. And a lot of times in order to have that story be delivered in a way where all those things can be accomplished, you do have to give them time. At the same time, nothing reminds you more that you are going to die someday, like looking at your TBR and realizing you just do not have the time to read all the books you want to read. So, as such, because I, like many fantasy fans, am in the middle of so many series, I figure we gotta trim some of them out, and these are the ones from this year that are not making the cut. Jumping into it, the first book is one where I've only read the first book in the series, and I don't think I've even once had the chance to talk about this book, but I guess, spoiler alert, I'm not gonna keep going with the series. I did read the entirety of the first book, but anyway, that would be a discovery of witches, and I liked aspects of this. This is one of those things that had been kind of continuously on my TBR, where I'd heard about it years ago. I know there's a show, I know a lot of people like it, I know a lot of people point to it as a fun dark academia book, and I was semi-invested for a decent amount of the story, and then at some point it just took a turn and, in my opinion, became kind of corny. So once that happened, I was far less invested. Also, I do think that the protagonist has a little bit of a case of not like other girls, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that. It's not just that she has that. I think it's more that other people around her kind of reinforce that those are good qualities of hers. As an example, there's this one part where the love interest is like, we need to get out of here, so pack quick and pack light. And she's like, okay. So she does, and he's like, huh. And she's like, what? And his response is like, most of the women that I've told in the past to pack light don't. Cool, I guess. I'm glad that you two are so in love with each other for such good reasons. But anyway, stuff like that. But that's not the main thing. I can forgive a thing here and there that irks me, but I just didn't like the direction it went, unfortunately. So I don't plan to continue on with this. Next up, though, we have two that are, I feel like, big hits in fantasy spaces, and unfortunately, neither of these worked for me. One of them was The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. I have said so many times that I love Age of Madness. I also really quite enjoy, of course, the First Law trilogy, which comes first. Really like those. Age of Madness is one of my favorite series of all time. It is absolutely fantastic. The Devils did not work for me. I think if you're somebody who The Devils was your first Abercrombie and it didn't work for you, I don't necessarily think that it is the best indication of everything that Joe Abercrombie has to offer, which isn't necessarily to say that the things I like are him at his objective best. It's just that I think he is representing different things in the stories, and he's telling them in very different ways and with a different tone. And in The Devils, the tone is one joke after the next, oftentimes the same joke over and over again, and that didn't really work for me, and it just felt a little too edgy for my tastes, whereas I feel that it's a little bit drier in his other works, the humor, and I think that the commentary to me stood out a little bit better in his other series than it did in this one, so I'm not going to be continuing on with this. Oh, also, I found it fairly predictable. There was something that was introduced early on, and I thought, well, this is obviously going to be the big reveal later, right? I hope not, because he's usually pretty good at surprising you. And so then when that did happen, I was like, all right. So there's just a lot about it that didn't really quite work. And then after that, we have Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. So a quick explanation, if you are new. I despised the main character of this story, and not because he's the most despicable or because he is the most terrible human being ever to grace the pages of a fantasy book, but because he's just so annoying and so whiny. So I was not a fan. And I kept going because it was part of a buddy read. And it was not a buddy read I was hosting. If it was a buddy read I was hosting, I'd be like, hey, everyone, I don't know. But because it was for someone else, I was like, I have to keep going because I've committed to this. And I want to honor all of the hard work that Erin was the host, that Erin has put into putting together this buddy read. So I also read the second one. Luckily, the character from the first one that I couldn't stand was in it less. However, a character that I found kind of cool in the first book also became very annoying in the second book. And I really just didn't care about basically anything that was occurring. And while we did spend more time with other characters, the way that we switched between them, it was so frequent. Sometimes it would be every other page or every page and a half. And not only would it be a frequent change of perspective, but you also sometimes would switch between different perspectives and then come back to the perspective that you started with. And then there would be a page break and it would be more of that same same character. And then we'd have a page break and it'd be a different character. And we switched so frequently that it just felt like we were getting snapshots of scenes. And given how vast the world is and just how much there is to it, I kind of wanted to allow for everything to sit and to actually get to feel like we're living in this world with these characters. Not to say that I wanted it to be slower paced, but I just kind of wanted more time when we were with characters. Interestingly, the series is technically a trilogy, but it's considered a 4-part trilogy because the third book's so long they split it into 2. And I did start the third book, but a few things occurred the week of the live show for the third book because, as noted, even though I didn't really enjoy either the first or the second book, because I wanted to honor the commitment I made to the buddy read, I was going to read the third one also. The week of the live show, I broke my toe. So I was not going to be moving around very quick, and I knew it was going to take me so much longer to do everything I needed to do and just move around and get dressed and all those kinds of things because I could hardly walk. And then also I had to go, to the podiatrist and all that stuff. So that happened. And then also around the same time, Erin is taking a shift in what she's doing over on her channel. And before we formally knew this, we just saw, meaning we as in the people that were in the group, that every video was gone from her channel. And so we were messaging, asking like, hey, is everything okay? Or is everything all right? Is everything still... It felt kind of superficial to be like, are we still doing this live show? Because we also were... Sorry, there's a fuzz. We were also kind of concerned for her, but everything was fine. She got back to us a couple days before the scheduled live show that everything was good. She was good to do the live show, and she had just been kind of taking a social media break. But all those things combined, I mean, mostly it was the fractured toe, but also then there was sort of the like, oh, is this happening? And I'm gonna, obviously be really straightforward. Because it was unclear if it was going to be happening, and because of the injury and the fact that I was slowing down, I was like, because that book, the audiobook is 63 hours long, just to give you an indication of how long the third book and what is. And I had already read some of it, but I was like, I don't want to read all of this if it turns out we're not having the live show, especially because so much of what I typically do is going to take so much longer. So that means all my spare time would be going into reading this book I don't even like. So I DNF'd it. And also, I'm not planning to finish it now. Because I don't have a reason to. And I just know what's going to happen. He's going to become king because he is the protagonist. And even though he fails upwards, he's just going to keep failing upwards. And I just know it's going to go that direction. And I don't care how he gets there. I don't care how Simon becomes the king. I just know that's what's going to happen. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I'm not like, what? He's not going to become the king? Well, maybe I want to keep reading then. He irritates me so much. But anyway, I have ranted too much about Simon in the past, so let's cut it off officially. Next few, we actually have quite a few. I'm looking at them, a lot of fantasy romance series that I don't plan to continue on with. So I'm going to go through these decently quick. First up, we have The Nightblood Prince. While I did like the way in which certain fantastical beings were in this world, as I felt like it was a different approach than what I've seen before, ultimately, I just found that I would say second half of the first book didn't really play out in a way that I found enjoyable. The first half I was more invested in because it was a little bit more character focused, and also it was showing the trials of making certain decisions. But then when it actually did kind of start to become a little bit more of a love triangle, I lost a little bit of interest in that case. Kind of a similar thing to Discovery of Witches. It's not that I have, of course, an issue with romances playing. I don't even care if it is the main plot line, but it's more that when I feel as though the story is kind of all of a sudden being consumed by the romance, where it doesn't feel like everything we were setting up initially is getting the time that it deserves to play out in a satisfying way. That's more so when I start to drop off. Because I also want to be clear, it's not that I am upset if it starts out not having necessarily a lot of romance and eventually more romance comes into the picture, especially if you know going in that the romance is probably going to play a decent role in the story, because sometimes that large amount of setup is a good thing so that you actually are caring a little bit more about what's transpiring later on. But if there are some really intense stakes, but we are primarily focused on will they, won't they, or who are they going to choose, I'm like, oh, but you set up all these other interesting things, and this is less interesting to me. So that's part of it for that one. We also have Soul Gazer. The writing style at the beginning of the story I actually found to be quite pretty and different and slightly disorienting, which was kind of cool. And then it became less of that as we continued on, and it became a little bit more of what I've seen in a lot of fantasy romance, especially the dynamics between the protagonists. So as a result, I became less involved in what was transpiring as the story progressed. Warrior Princess Assassin is I think I kind of incorrectly categorized this as a why choose in the past. It's not exactly the best way to describe it. It's more of why should any of us choose kind of situation. And as far as having a story that is really focused on the romance within a fantasy world, I do feel like Brigid Kemmerer, she did a lot of it quite well, and the development of the characters, as well as the blending of the stakes. So while I thought all of it was done well, it just wasn't exactly the kind of book that I'm as interested in. This would be one, though, that if you are a huge fantasy romance fan, I would recommend this one. I thought it was done well, especially for, I think actually really for fantasy romance readers. I think it accomplished a lot of what fantasy romance readers are looking for, and it accomplished those things in ways that are different from what I have typically seen. And then we also have The Night and the Moth. I have talked about this one quite a lot ever since I read it. It just, even though it was a little bit more of a balance of fantasy and romance, it just didn't quite end up delivering in either area for me personally. So I was kind of either wanting more of the fantasy because the world actually was cool, but I just felt like we kept getting pieces of it and enough pieces to progress the plot, but I wanted a little bit more of it. And then with the romance, I didn't feel like the romance was something that I was finding to be swoon-worthy or anything like that. It felt pretty familiar. So this one also, I mean, the whole point of this is to be like, I'm not gonna keep going with these. It'd be really out of nowhere if I was like, despite that though, I've decided right here on the spot, I'm gonna keep going with it. I'm not gonna keep going with this one. And then the last of the fantasy romance books would be Spellcaster. Also, similar to A Discovery of Witches, have not had the chance to talk about this book very much. But let me tell you, this one did not work for me. It's a very unserious book, and it knows it. So on one hand, I feel like it's doing a good job accomplishing what it's going for. I think it's meant to be very, very fast-paced, and it's meant to not be it's by no means that story where you're like, oh, the pining and it's so romantic. That is not what this book is going for. Very hyper dramatic way of writing the story and the dialogue between the characters. It's snappy and it's fun and it's a page turner and it's super over the top. And sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes when books do that, borderline, I do want to keep going because I'm highly entertained, but I feel like I'm entertained for the wrong reasons because I feel like I'm laughing at it and not with it. So even though I don't think it's a self-serious book whatsoever, I feel like it would be unkind to keep going. So I'm not gonna keep going. But let me tell you, I had tears running down my face at certain parts, and it occupied many messages to my friends the day that I was really in the thick of reading it. Anyway, and then last for today, this is not, I wouldn't say any of the feelings I've described for basically any of the rest of them are true for this one. Of all of these, maybe this is the one that I would keep going with. But I still, like I said at the beginning, I'm gonna die someday, like all the rest of us. So I gotta make room for the ones that I truly, 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 really loved. So the book would be The Raven Scholar. Maybe, if ever I was doing a second chance kind of thing, I would put this one up for a vote, or I would just make the decision to go ahead and keep going. But I just found the tone of this was not quite what I wanted out of it, even though I liked the world building, even though I liked the lore, even though I liked the general feel of blending fantasy and a murder mystery. And it's got a trials plotline, it's got a lot going on. And I do think that it did a decent enough job of bouncing between all of these things. I just found that the tone was not quite what I was looking for. It was really close though. So something like Gideon the Ninth, I think, does this sort of, sometimes it's really serious and beautiful, and then other times it's really stupid, and the juxtaposition is very entertaining and intentional. I do think it is almost like a version of that. It's just, I'm so picky when it comes to that kind of balance of kind of camp and also something a little bit more serious. That's the key word for today, I suppose. But I can be so picky about that balance, and this one just didn't quite work for me in that way. But anyway, that concludes the list of series that I am planning to DNF for now, anyway, of the books that I picked up this year. These are the ones that I am not planning to continue on with. But anyway, feel free to elaborate on anything I said. If you really want to try to convince me to keep going, feel free to make the argument on the book's behalf. But let me know also what is something that you have decided from this year that you're thinking. It doesn't have to be a new release from this year, just something you read this year that you're thinking, I don't think this is a series for me. Feel free to mention that as well. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.